The evening air felt heavy as the girl sat quietly at the shelter gate. Her small frame pressed against the cold metal bars as if she were trying to disappear into them. She held an old backpack against her chest, gripping the straps so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. The street behind her was growing darker, but she didn't look back at it. She kept her eyes on the ground, waiting, thinking, and worrying all at the same time. Every sound made her jump a little, but she tried to stay still, hoping no one would ask her to. Many questions. She had been sitting there for almost an hour when one of the shelter staff walked past and noticed her. He slowed down, unsure if she needed help or was simply resting. She looked young, too young to be alone on a cold evening. He asked her gently if she was lost, but the girl only shook her head, barely lifting her chin. He told her the shelter was open and she could come inside, but she whispered that she was waiting for someone. Her voice was calm, but her eyes showed she was scared of something bigger than the cold. After a few minutes, the staff member went inside to inform the others. They had seen many children and adults come to the shelter in all kinds of situations. Some were hungry, some scared, some confused, but something about this girl felt different. She seemed ready to run at any moment, yet too tired to move. She wasn't just looking for a warm place. She was holding a secret, something she wasn't sure she could share. Inside the shelter, people were settling in for the evening. Warm food had been served, and the volunteers were cleaning up. A quiet hum of conversation filled the space, a mix of relief and exhaustion. Among the volunteers was the man who oversaw the shelter, someone known for checking the grounds every evening. He didn't like staying behind a desk when people outside needed to be seen and understood in person. When he heard about the girl at the gate, he nodded and stepped outside. He didn't rush. He walked the way he always did when approaching someone who might be frightened. Calm steps, soft voice, open hands. When he reached the gate, he saw her sitting there, hugging her backpack and staring at the ground as if reading something in the dust. He greeted her, not asking anything right away, just letting her know he was there. She didn't look up at first. She seemed to be waiting for him to say something else, something that would decide whether she trusted him or not. After a moment, she raised her eyes. They were tired, but there was a strong spark in them, the kind that comes from someone who has had to be older than their age. He asked if she was cold and offered her a warm blanket. The girl hesitated, then slowly reached out and took it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she wrapped it around her shoulders. He asked if she was hungry, and this time she didn't speak. She just gave a small nod. He offered to bring food outside so she wouldn't have to go in if she didn't want to yet. She nodded again. He walked back inside, asked a volunteer to prepare a warm bowl of soup and a piece of bread, then returned to the gate. The girl accepted the food and began eating in small bites as if she wasn't used to eating in front of other people. She didn't rush, even though she was clearly hungry. She seemed careful, almost protective of the food, as if she wasn't sure when the next meal would come. He sat down on the step near her, not too close, giving her enough space to feel safe. For a while, neither of them said anything. The street was quiet, except for the distant sound of cars and the wind brushing against the fence. He didn't want to push her. He knew that people who show up at shelter gates often carry stories that are hard to share. After she finished half the soup, she looked at him briefly before lowering her gaze again. He asked her name softly. She whispered it, barely loud enough to hear. He repeated it gently so she knew he had understood. Then he asked if she needed help. She didn't respond right away. She held the spoon tightly in her hand and stared at the bowl as if she were thinking about whether she could trust him with the truth. When she finally spoke, her answer was quiet but firm. She said she needed help, but not for herself. That was all she said. She didn't explain further. He waited, hoping she would continue, but she didn't. She pulled the blanket closer around her shoulders. As if remembering something painful, he tried to make her feel comfortable. He told her the shelter was safe, that they didn't turn away children. Now, whatever she was worried about, she didn't have to face it alone. She listened to every word, but didn't relax. It was clear she had heard similar promises before, and not all of them had been kept. He asked if she had been staying nearby. She said yes. Then he asked if she wanted to come inside where it was warm. She shook her head again. She said she couldn't go inside without the person she was waiting for. He asked who she was waiting for, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the trees across the street, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. He followed her gaze, but saw nothing there. He realized then that whoever she was waiting for, she cared deeply about them. Her fear wasn't for herself, it was for someone else. Someone she was trying to protect. The girl finished the soup and set the bowl down gently. She thanked him in a quiet voice, almost shyly. He could tell she wasn't used to being helped. She was cautious with her words, as if she had learned how to avoid saying too much. He asked if she was hurt or if anyone had threatened her. She shook her head. Then he asked if the person she was waiting for was in trouble. Her eyes widened slightly and she looked away, giving him the answer without speaking. He didn't ask more. He could see she was reaching a point where questions might make her shut down. Instead, he offered her something simple. He told her she could stay right where she was for as long as she needed. No one would force her inside. No one would chase her away. He just wanted her to know she was safe. Those words seemed to soften her posture a little. Not fully, but enough that she sighed quietly, as if she had been holding her breath for hours. She shifted closer to the gate, not to enter, but to lean against it in a more relaxed way. Her shoulders dropped slightly. She still looked tired, but she was no longer ready to run. He stood up and told her he would be nearby. If she needed anything, she only had to call his name. She nodded. For a moment, he considered leaving her alone, but something told him to stay within sight. So he moved a few steps away, giving her space, while still making sure she didn't feel abandoned. Several volunteers peeked outside, curious about the girl. He asked them to give her space, explaining that she wasn't ready to come inside yet. They understood. Many had worked at the shelter long enough to notice when a child was carrying a heavy story. As time passed, the street grew even darker. The lights from the shelter cast a warm glow on the pavement, and the girl stayed where she was, wrapped in the blanket. Every so often, she glanced toward the trees again. Her expression changed each time: hope, fear, worry, determination. It was clear she was fighting many emotions at once. After a while, the man returned to sit a little closer to her. He didn't speak at first. He just sat there, showing her she wasn't alone. Some children opened up when spoken to. Others opened up when someone simply stayed. Eventually, she broke the silence. She said she wasn't sure if she should have come. She didn't know if she was making the right choice. She said she wasn't used to asking for help, and she didn't want to get anyone in trouble. He told her that asking for help was never wrong, and sometimes the hardest choices were the ones that saved lives. She listened, but her hands tightened around her backpack again. She said she didn't want to go inside unless she was sure the person she cared about wouldn't be taken away from her. Her voice began to tremble, and he realized something deeper was happening. She wasn't just waiting. She was afraid of losing someone important. He asked if the person she was waiting for was younger than her. The girl hesitated, then gave a very small nod. He felt his heart sink a little. Younger children alone on the streets often faced serious danger. He kept his voice calm and steady, telling her that if she trusted him, he would help both of them. But she shook her head again. She said trust was something she had to think about, not something she could give easily. He respected that. He told her she didn't have to decide right away. She could wait. She could think. She could take her time. He wasn't going to push her. The night continued, and the sounds of the city faded into a quiet stillness. The girl kept glancing toward the same spot across the street, and he finally understood. Whoever she was waiting for wasn't going to appear unless they felt it was safe. That meant the person she was waiting for might be hiding nearby, watching. Unsure of whether to come closer, he didn't look around or act startled. He didn't want to scare anyone. He simply adjusted his posture and kept his voice gentle. He told the girl that whoever she cared about was welcome to. She didn't need to bring them inside right away. They could stay together. The girl looked at him with surprise. She hadn't expected him to think that far. Her eyes softened, and for the first time she seemed to believe he meant what he said. She didn't reveal anything more that night, but something changed in her expression. The fear was still there, but now it shared space with a small bit of hope. She leaned back against the gate, no longer gripping the backpack as tightly. The blanket around her shoulders warmed her just enough to stop her shivering. The man sat there with her, waiting, listening to the quiet, understanding that sometimes the first part of helping someone is simply showing them they are safe. And as the night deepened, the girl finally whispered something so soft he almost missed it. She said she hoped she wasn't too late. Those words stayed with him, settling heavily in the cold air. Whoever she was waiting for mattered deeply to her, and whatever had led her here had pushed her to her limit. But she was here now, at the gate of a place where new stories often began. And even though she didn't know it yet, this evening was the first step toward changing everything. The night had grown quieter, and the last bit of evening light had faded completely by the time the girl finally loosened her grip on her backpack. She still sat close to the gate, wrapped in the blanket. But the fear that had held her so tightly earlier seemed to soften at the edges. The man sat a short distance from her, keeping his presence steady and calm. He knew better than to rush her, and she seemed to understand that he wasn't going to push her into saying more than she was ready to share. A soft breeze brushed across the pavement, carrying the faint smell of warm food from inside the shelter. The girl's stomach growled quietly, and she pulled the blanket a little higher, embarrassed. The man pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of her silence. After a few minutes, he stood up and told her he would be right back. He didn't ask if she wanted more food. He simply brought it another bowl of soup, a piece of fruit, and a bottle of water. When he returned, he placed it gently in front of her, without forcing it into her hands. She looked at the food, hesitated, then slowly reached out. She ate in small bites again, careful and quiet, as if she expected someone to snatch the food away at any moment. The man could see the way she kept glancing toward the street, her mind clearly split between hunger and worry. She wasn't just eating for herself. She was thinking about someone else with every bite. He waited until she had taken a few sips of water before speaking. He asked if she had been outside long. She didn't answer right away. She took another sip, then whispered that she had been moving around different places for days. She didn't specify where, but the exhaustion in her voice told him more than details ever could. He asked gently if her home was far from here. Her expression tightened, and she shook her head, but not in a simple no. It was a no that carried pain, a no that said home wasn't something she could return to. He didn't push the topic. Instead, he asked if the person she was waiting for knew she had come here. This time she nodded, but it was a small, unsure nod, as if she didn't fully trust her own answer. She said she had told the person to wait, and she promised she would come back. Her voice cracked slightly when she said it. He asked if the person was younger, already knowing the answer from the way she had reacted earlier. She didn't speak. She stared at the ground, her hand tightening around the bottle of water. Then she whispered barely louder than her breath, but she couldn't let anything happen to him. The man felt a deep heaviness settle in his chest. It was clear now. She was protecting a younger sibling. It explained everything. The fear, the hesitation. The way she refused to enter the shelter without him. He didn't show alarm. He didn't let worry color his voice. Instead, he asked softly where her brother was. She didn't look up. She didn't move. She simply whispered that he was close. Close enough to see her. Close enough to run if he had to. The man didn't turn around to look. He didn't want to scare the boy. Children on the streets learned quickly how to hide themselves in shadows, how to disappear when they felt unsafe. He told her he wouldn't go looking unless she asked him to. The girl's head lifted slightly, her eyes filled with surprise. She wasn't used to adults giving her this kind of control. Most people told her what to do. No one asked what she wanted, he continued, speaking softly. He told her that the shelter was a safe place, not just for her, but for her brother too. He said they wouldn't separate them. They wouldn't question why they showed up together. They wouldn't blame them for running or hiding. They would simply help. The girl listened without interrupting. She held the bottle between her hands as if she were using it to steady herself. She looked toward the trees again, then back at the man. Then she took a slow breath and said she needed him to promise something. He nodded, letting her speak when she was ready. She said she needed him to promise that no one would take her brother away from her. Not the police, not the shelters, not strangers. She had heard too many stories. She had seen too many things. She couldn't risk losing him. The man answered without hesitation. He promised that whatever help they offered would be given to both of them together. He didn't promise the impossible. He didn't promise things outside his power, but he promised what he could control, that within the shelter walls. They would stay together. The girl studied him for a long moment. She wanted to believe him, but trust was something she had learned to build slowly. Still, something in his voice. Or maybe the way he sat quietly beside her, instead of towering over her, made her soften just enough. She told him her brother had been sick. Not sick in a way that needed a hospital, at least she hoped not, but weak and tired. He had stopped complaining days ago, which scared her even more. Younger children usually complained loudly when they were uncomfortable, but he had grown almost silent. And silence worried her more than coughing or crying ever could. She said she had been giving him most of her food. Bread she found, snacks someone handed out at a stoplight, whatever they could get. She hadn't eaten properly in days, but it didn't matter to her. She only cared that he stayed awake when she told him stories at night. Each word she spoke came out carefully, as if she were afraid that saying too much might cause everything to collapse. She admitted she had come to the shelter because she didn't know what else to do. She had run out of ideas. She had run out of strength. But she hadn't run out of responsibility. She would do anything for him. The man listened quietly. The more she revealed, the more he understood the weight she had been carrying. Children weren't meant to carry such heavy burdens. Yet here she was, doing everything she could. He asked if her brother would be willing to come closer if she called him. She looked toward the street again. Her breath grew shaky. She said she didn't want to scare him. She didn't want him to see too many adults around. He didn't trust grown-ups easily. The man nodded. He said they wouldn't crowd him. He said he could speak to the volunteers and clear the area. She seemed relieved at the idea. Then she whispered something that chilled him more than the cold air. She said her brother had told her earlier that if she didn't come back, he would find her. He would try. And she knew he meant it. He wouldn't leave her alone in the dark. That meant he might try to cross streets or wander between buildings just to find her. The thought scared her more than anything else. The man realized then that time mattered. Not in a rushed or panicked way, but in a soft, careful urgency. The boy needed help before fear made him move into danger. He asked gently if she wanted to bring him inside now. She hesitated again, biting her lower lip. She whispered that she didn't know if he was ready to walk into a building full of people. But she knew he needed warmth. She knew he needed rest. The man told her they could meet somewhere quieter. Not inside the main hall. Not near other families. They had smaller rooms, quiet places, calmer spaces. The girl looked surprised again. She asked if that was allowed. He told her that helping her brother was more important than rules about where guests entered. She nodded slowly, thinking, worrying, measuring his words. Finally, she said she could try to call him if the man moved a little farther back, not far enough to disappear, but far enough that her brother wouldn't feel trapped. He agreed immediately. He stood up, walked a few steps away, then looked back to make sure she felt comfortable. She gave a tiny nod. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stood up for the first time since she arrived. Her legs trembled slightly from fatigue, but she steadied herself. She walked to the edge of the gate, looked toward the trees and bushes across the street, and whispered a small, soft call. It wasn't a shout or a name. It was a sound only someone close to her would recognize. Something familiar. Something safe. The man stayed still, his breath slow, his hands relaxed. He didn't want to frighten the boy hiding in the shadows. At first, nothing happened. The girl called again, a little louder this time. Her voice carried through the still night air, gentle and hopeful. A moment passed, then another. And then, from the darkness, there was the faintest movement. The girl's shoulders lifted slightly. She took a small step forward. Holding onto the blanket with one hand and gripping her backpack strap with the other. The man didn't turn toward the sound. He kept his eyes on the ground near his feet, letting the moment unfold without pressure. A shape slowly emerged from behind the trees. Small, thin, shivering. A younger boy stepped into the glow of the streetlight, his eyes scanning the area with fear and caution. The girl took another step, whispering softly, reassuring him. The boy hesitated, then walked toward her in small, unsteady steps. She reached out and touched his arm gently. The boy looked at her, then at the blanket she wore, then at the shelter behind her. His eyes were tired, filled with exhaustion that no child should ever experience. The man lifted his head just enough to see them, but didn't move closer. He kept his expression calm and warm, letting the children see that he wasn't a threat. The girl knelt beside her brother and wrapped part of the blanket around him. She whispered something to him, something soft and comforting. The boy leaned against her weakly. She slowly guided him toward the man. They walked carefully, step by step, as if they were navigating a world that had often failed them. When they reached him, the girl spoke first. She didn't ask for help. She didn't apologize. She simply said she needed a place where he could rest. The man nodded, his voice gentle. He told them they could come inside together, but only if they wanted to. There was a quiet room prepared for them. No bright lights. No loud noises. The girl looked at her brother. The boy looked at the girl. Then, holding on to each other, they nodded. And for the first time that night, they stepped away from the cold street, moving slowly toward a place where fear didn't have to follow them. The quiet room inside the shelter was dimly lit, with only a soft lamp glowing in the corner. It was small but warm, with a low couch, a folded blanket, and 2 chairs pushed gently against the wall. When the man led the siblings inside, he made sure to walk slowly, not wanting them to feel rushed or watched. He opened the door for them and then stepped aside, allowing them to enter first. The boy looked around nervously, clutching his sister's hand as though he feared she might disappear if he'd let go. His steps were uneven, as if each one required more strength than he had left. The girl helped him along, whispering quiet words to calm him. The man stood by the door, keeping a good distance. He didn't want the children to feel trapped. Once they were inside, the girl guided her brother to the small couch. The boy sank down slowly, almost collapsing into the cushions. His thin frame curled in on itself as he tried to get comfortable. The girl knelt beside him, smoothing his hair and adjusting the blanket around him. Like she had done it 1,000 times, the man waited another moment before he spoke. Making sure their focus stayed on each other and not on him, he told them he would bring warm tea and another blanket. He asked the girl if her brother preferred something sweet or something plain. She hesitated, then said he liked sweet things, but wouldn't ask for them. The man nodded and stepped out of the room, closing the door softly so they could breathe in silence. The hallway outside was quiet, and he walked quickly toward the small kitchen area where volunteers were cleaning up. He told them he needed warm tea with honey, some crackers, and another blanket. The volunteers prepared everything without questions. They didn't know the details, but they saw the urgency in his eyes. When he returned to the room, he knocked gently before entering. The girl looked up, her expression cautious but calmer than before. He set the tea and crackers on a small table near the couch and placed the folded blanket on the backrest. The boy didn't reach for anything, but his eyes lingered on the tea for a moment. The girl noticed and asked quietly if he wanted to try some. He nodded weakly. She helped him sit up, holding the cup steady while he sipped. The warm liquid seemed to ease some of the tension in his small body. The man watched from a distance, trying not to disturb them. He could see how carefully she handled her brother. Every movement she made was gentle, every word was soft. She wasn't just being protective, she was carrying a responsibility far too heavy for her age. After a few minutes, he asked if he could sit on one of the chairs. The girl nodded, giving him silent permission. He sat down slowly, keeping his voice calm and steady. He asked the girl if her brother had been sick for long. She didn't answer right away. She looked at her brother's face, then lowered her gaze, She said he had been coughing days ago. Then the coughing stopped. But the tiredness didn't stop. At first, she thought he was just worn out from walking and sleeping outside. But then he stopped wanting to eat, even when she brought him the best food she could find. She said he had been trying to act strong for her, pretending he wasn't cold or hungry. But 2 nights ago, he had trouble standing, and that's when she knew something was wrong. That was why she came to the shelter tonight, because she didn't know where else to go. The boy's small hand clung to the blanket as she spoke. He didn't interrupt her, but his eyes tracked every word as if he understood more than he let on. The man leaned forward slightly and asked if the boy felt any pain. The boy shook his head at first, then paused, then nodded a little. He pointed to his chest and then to his stomach. The girl frowned and held his hand. The man didn't want to alarm them, so he kept his expression neutral. He said gently that the boy needed to see the shelter nurse. Not a hospital, not a stranger, just the nurse who worked with children all the time. Someone kind, someone who wouldn't separate them. The girl looked uncertain, her grip tightening on her brother's shoulder. She asked if the nurse would try to take him away. The man shook his head immediately. He said the nurse's job was to help, not to separate families. He explained that the nurse could check the boy's temperature, see if he needed medicine, and make sure he was not in danger. He reassured her that they could both stay in the room during the check. No one would move the boy without her. Her shoulders relaxed a little, though worry still lingered in her eyes. She looked at her brother again, brushing his hair gently. She whispered that she wouldn't leave him, no matter what. The boy leaned closer to her, as if her voice was the only thing keeping him steady. The man stood up and said he would call the nurse. Before leaving, he asked if they wanted anything else, more food, water, another blanket. The girl shook her head. She only asked if the room door could stay slightly open. She didn't like the feeling of closed spaces. He agreed at once and left the door cracked open as he stepped into the hall. He walked to the nurse's small office at the end of the corridor. The nurse, an older woman with kind eyes, listened carefully as he explained the situation in low, quiet tones. She didn't rush, didn't panic. She simply gathered her small medical bag and followed him to the room. Before entering, she knocked softly. The girl opened the door wider, her eyes scanning the nurse with caution. The nurse smiled warmly and introduced herself in a gentle voice. She asked if it was all right for her to come in. The girl looked at her brother. He didn't speak, but he nodded slightly. She stepped back and allowed the nurse to enter. Inside, the nurse crouched beside the boy, speaking to him softly. She asked his name, his age, and how he felt. The boy answered in short whispers. The girl stayed close, holding his hand the whole time. The nurse checked his temperature with a small device, listened to his breathing and felt his pulse. She moved slowly and explained everything she was doing, making sure the children didn't feel scared. After a few minutes, she stood up and looked at the man. The girl saw at the small crease of concern in the nurse's forehead, and her heart tightened. The man asked the nurse quietly if everything was all right. The nurse didn't want to frighten the children, so she kept her tone calm. She said the boy was weak from hunger and exhaustion, and his body was cold from being outside for too long. She said he needed rest, warm food, and fluids. She also said they should watch him closely tonight. The girl asked in a trembling voice if he would be okay. The nurse knelt beside her and said he would feel better with care and warmth, but he needed time. She told the girl she had done the right thing by bringing him here. That sentence made the girl look down, as if she wasn't sure she deserved such praise. The nurse prepared a warm drink with some vitamins mixed in and helped the boy sip it slowly. Then she tucked both children under the blanket, making a small nest of warmth around them. She told them she would check again later, then she left the room. The man sat down on the chair again. The girl watched him. Her brother's breathing grew slower, deeper, more relaxed. After a while, the girl began to speak again. Not because she was pushed, but because the quiet room made her feel safe enough. She told the man about the shelter that had turned them away days before. She said they didn't have enough space, and she understood that. But what scared her was the moment someone said they might have to separate her from her brother. If they couldn't find room for both, she said she grabbed her brother's hand and ran before anyone could stop them. They had been sleeping behind stores and near bus stops since then. She tried to keep him warm, but the nights had grown colder and she didn't know how to fix that. She said she had seen people walk past them without noticing. Others looked at them and frowned, as if they were a problem instead of children who needed help. And then she whispered the things she had been carrying quietly inside her. She was afraid that if anything happened to her brother, it would be her fault. The man felt that sentence hit him deeply. He leaned forward and told her gently that nothing that happened to them was her fault. She was doing more than many adults would have done. She had protected him, carried him, fed him, comforted him. Everything she had done was out of love. But she shook her head. She said she was supposed to take care of him, and she had failed. He was sick, and it happened under her watch. The man spoke softly. He told her that taking care of someone didn't mean she had control over everything. It meant she kept trying, no matter how hard things became. And she had been doing that every single day. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her worn jacket. She didn't cry loudly. She didn't draw attention to her pain. Her tears came silently, almost ashamed to be seen. The boy shifted in his sleep, pressing closer to her. She wrapped an arm around him, breathing in deeply as if anchoring herself. The man stayed quiet, letting her feel what she needed to feel. After a long moment, she asked him why he had helped them. She said most adults would have told them to find someone else or a different shelter. She asked what made him stop and talk to them. He thought about his answer. He didn't want to give her a shallow explanation. He said he didn't see two problems at the gate. He saw two children who needed someone to pause, to listen, to care. He said he had learned long ago that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change the direction of someone's life. The girl listened, her eyes softening. He told her that he didn't help because he's in charge of the shelter. He helped because people deserve to be treated with dignity and care, especially children. The room grew quiet again. The girl's breathing slowed. Her shoulders began to relax, the tension easing out of her bit by bit. She leaned back against the couch, still holding her brother close. The man stood and said he would let them rest. He told them he would be nearby all night if they needed anything. He walked toward the door, leaving it slightly open just as she had asked. Before he stepped into the hall, the girl called out softly. He turned around. She looked at him with tired but sincere eyes and whispered, "Thank you for not walking past us." Then she leaned her head gently against her brother's, letting the warmth of the room hold them both as the night settled around them. The evening air outside the shelter felt colder than usual, as if the world itself had been holding its breath since the girl revealed the truth about her younger brother. The CEO stood near the gate with a strange heaviness in his chest. He had seen many difficult cases over the years, but something about this quiet girl, her fear and the way she spoke about her brother, had struck him deeper than he expected. He didn't waste another second. The moment she told him where her brother might be hiding, he called the staff members who were experienced in searching the nearby blocks. They grabbed flashlights and warm blankets while he stayed with the girl, who sat on the wooden bench just inside the shelter gate. She hugged the blanket he'd given her, but her eyes kept drifting toward the dark street, like she was waiting for something bad to happen. Every few minutes she whispered, "Please find him. Please." Her voice shook each time. The CEO sat a little distance away so she wouldn't feel pressured, but he didn't leave her alone. He kept telling her softly, "We'll bring him here. He'll be safe." Even though he said the words with confidence, a part of him worried. If the boy was hiding because he was scared, he might not respond to strangers calling his name. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of cars passing by, the wind moving dried leaves along the road, and the distant noises of the street only made her more anxious. She flinched whenever someone walked by the gate. Finally, she looked at him and whispered, "I should have brought him with me. I thought maybe they would send us away if they saw both of us. And he's not strong. I didn't want him to hear someone say there was no space again." Her hands trembled, and she held them together tightly as if trying to stop them from shaking. He shook his head gently. "You were trying to protect him. That's not something to blame yourself for. You did the best you could." She didn't respond, but a tear fell on her blanket. The CEO felt a mix of sadness and frustration. Sadness because of what the children had gone through, and frustration because the world too easily looked away from kids like them. He wondered how many people walked past the girl and her brother without asking if they needed help. How many saw them as an inconvenience instead of frightened children? He stayed silent, giving her space, but ready to talk when she needed. After what felt like an eternity, the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt crackled. A voice came through. "We found him. Behind the old storage shed 2 blocks down." Before the message even finished, the girl shot up from the bench. "Is he okay?" she asked, breathless. The staff member replied, "He's awake. Looks weak but responsive. Bringing him back now." The CEO felt her entire body relax in a single shaky breath. She sat again, but this time her shoulders dropped, as if 100 pounds had been lifted. He placed a comforting hand on the back of the bench, not touching her, but close enough that she knew he was there. A few minutes later, the 2 staff members appeared, walking carefully. Between them, wrapped in a blanket, was a small boy with tired eyes and messy hair. His steps were slow, and he leaned heavily against one of the staff. But he was standing. The girl ran to him, but she stopped just short of throwing her arms around him, afraid to hurt him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. The boy looked up at her and gave a weak nod. "I waited," he whispered, as if that was the most important thing. She gently touched his face. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The boy blinked slowly, his eyes already heavy with exhaustion. The CEO stepped forward, careful not to crowd them. "Let's get him inside. Both of you. We'll make sure he's warm, fed, and checked by our nurse." They guided the children inside through the warm hallway that smelled faintly of soup and freshly washed blankets. The shelter wasn't fancy, but it was safe. And tonight, safety was everything. The nurse met them near the small clinic room. She examined the boy while the girl stood nearby, tense and silent. The nurse's tone was calm and comforting as she explained that he was dehydrated and tired, but not in immediate danger. "We'll give him fluids and food. After he rests, he'll feel much better," she said kindly. The girl nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on her brother as if afraid he might disappear again. After the boy was settled in a small bed with warm blankets and a cup of soup, the girl finally allowed herself to sit down. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, but she didn't complain. The CEO stood quietly by the doorway. When he saw she was finally breathing more steadily, he stepped inside. "You both did very well," he said softly. "You kept each other safe." She didn't answer right away. She stared at her brother, who was slowly sipping soup with closed eyes, like he was fighting sleep. Then her voice came out small and raw. I thought you would turn us away too." He felt those words like a punch to the chest. "Why would you think that?" he asked gently. "Because everyone does," she whispered. "People see us and act like we're trouble. Or they say the shelter is full. Or they tell us to try somewhere else. I didn't want my brother to hear someone say we didn't belong." Her hands gripped the sides of her chair. "So I came alone first, to see if maybe this time someone would listen." The CEO closed his eyes for a brief second. Her words were honest, not dramatic. And that honesty hurt more than anything. He knelt down, so he was at her eye level. But he kept a respectful distance. "You belong here," he said slowly. "Both of you. And no one will separate you. I promise." Her chin trembled, and for a moment she looked like she wanted to believe him but didn't know how. "You don't have to trust me right away," he continued. "But you're safe now. That's what matters tonight." The room stayed quiet except for the small sounds of the boy eating slowly. The nurse checked his blanket and smiled at the girl reassuringly. The CEO looked at the siblings. 2 children who had been carrying responsibilities no child should carry. Something inside him shifted. He had always taken his work seriously, but seeing them tonight made him realize how easy it was to overlook the deep fear behind a child's silence. After a few minutes, the girl finally whispered, "Thank you." Not loudly, not fully confident, but enough. He answered softly, "You're welcome. Rest now. Both of you have been through enough." He stepped back, giving them space but staying nearby in case they needed anything. As the night grew deeper, the shelter felt warmer. Staff members walked quietly, respecting the calm in the small clinic room. The girl eventually leaned her head on the side of her brother's bed, still watching him, but with a little less fear in her eyes. The CEO observed them from the hallway, feeling a weight in his chest. Not sadness exactly, but something heavy and real. Her words repeated in his mind. Everyone does. He knew he couldn't change the whole world overnight, but he could change tonight for these children. And he would. For the first time in a long while, stayed late not because of duty, but because he couldn't bring himself to leave. The girl finally drifted into sleep beside her brother. The boy rested peacefully for the first time in days, and the CEO walked back into his office with a quiet vow forming inside him that he would do more, listen better, and never forget the way fear had shaped her voice. Tonight wasn't just another night at the shelter. It was the beginning of something new for the children. And for him, the night slowly faded, and the shelter grew quiet as most people settled into their beds. By the time morning light crept in through the small clinic window, the boy was sleeping peacefully, his breathing steady and calm. The girl was still sitting beside him, her head resting on her crossed arms. She hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had finally taken over. The CEO arrived earlier than he had in months. He paused at the doorway of the small clinic room, noticing the way the early light touched the siblings' faces. Something about seeing them safe made him feel relief he didn't know he needed. The nurse walked in behind him and whispered. They slept well. The boy woke up once for water, then went right back to sleep. He's weak, but he'll recover, he nodded, his eyes still on the children. Good. They deserve a peaceful morning. After a few minutes, the girl stirred. She lifted her head, blinked a few times, and then quickly checked her brother as if afraid something might have changed while she slept. He's okay, the nurse said gently. He rested well. The girl nodded, letting out a breath she had been holding even while asleep. When she looked toward the doorway and saw the CEO, she sat up straight, almost as if she felt she needed to stay alert. You don't have to worry, he said with a kind smile. Both of you can take your time today. You're safe here. She didn't say anything at first, but her shoulders softened a little. A warm breakfast tray was brought in, and the boy slowly sat up with help, eating in small bites. The girl watched him the entire time, only starting her own food when she was sure he was okay. The CEO noticed how she always made herself come second. It wasn't a habit a child should have, but it showed how deeply she cared for her brother. After the children finished eating, the nurse led them to a clean room where they could rest together instead of staying in the clinic area. The room was small, but it had 2 beds, warm blankets, and sunlight coming in through a wide window. The girl sat on one bed, while the boy curled up on the other, tired again even after sleeping most of the night. The CEO stepped inside and spoke softly so the boy could rest. There's something I want to talk to you about. Nothing bad, just something important. Her eyes lifted, cautious, but listening. You mentioned last night that people turned you away before, that no one listened. She lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting together. I want you to know something, he continued. You're not invisible. You didn't do anything wrong. And what you said last night, it stayed with me. It made me realize how easy it is to miss what someone is going through. The girl swallowed hard. She wasn't used to adults speaking gently. Most people she had met in the last few months had been too tired, too stressed, or too busy to notice 2 quiet children trying to survive. He reached for the chair near the door and sat down. I want to help you. Not just for tonight, not just for a few days. I want to make sure you and your brother have a real chance. A future, a place where you won't be separated, and where you don't have to worry about where to sleep. Her eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them quickly, trying to stay composed. You don't have to trust that right away, he said, understanding her silence. But I'm going to make sure you have support. My team will help you get everything you need. She finally looked up. Like what? Food, clothes, school, a safe place to live. People who will look after you and your brother. And if you want, we can talk to social workers who can help you find a long-term home, one where you stay together. The girl's lips parted, but no words came out. She had never heard promises like these that felt real. He added softly, "You deserve more than just surviving day by day." The girl nodded slowly, still unsure how to accept so much kindness at once. Later that afternoon, the boy woke up with more energy. The shelter had arranged warm clothes for both of them, and the staff helped them take showers and get cleaned up. When the girl saw her brother in fresh clothes, with color returning to his cheeks, she covered her mouth to stop herself from crying again. The CEO watched from nearby, feeling something warm in his chest. It was rare to see so much change in such little time, but children were resilient. All they needed was a chance. Throughout the day, the shelter staff made sure the siblings felt welcome. Other children came by and offered toys or stories. The girl stayed close to her brother, but for the first time, she allowed herself to smile, a small hesitant smile, but real. At lunchtime, the CEO sat with them. The boy ate quietly, but the girl kept glancing at the CEO as if she wanted to say something. Finally, she spoke. "You really meant it," she whispered. "When you said we would stay together," he nodded. "I did, and I still do." She let out a long breath. "Thank you for listening." Those simple words were enough to make his chest tighten again. He realized how often children like her were forced to fight to be heard. In the late afternoon, a counselor met with them to understand their situation better. The girl answered questions honestly but carefully. She explained how long they had been alone, how they moved from place to place, and how she tried her best to keep her brother safe. The counselor was patient and gentle. By the end of the meeting, she promised the children they would not be separated under any circumstances. That night, the siblings rested in their new room, both of them finally warm, clean, and safe. The boy slept first, falling asleep almost instantly. The girl sat on her bed, legs crossed, looking out the window at the soft glow of street lights. When the CEO came by to check on them, she looked up. "Can I ask something?" she said shyly. "Of course. Why did you help us?" "You didn't even know us." He thought about it for a moment before answering. "Because someone should have asked you what you needed a long time ago. And because you were brave enough to come to the gate even though you were scared." She nodded slowly. "I was scared. But I didn't have anywhere else to go. And you came anyway," he said. "That takes courage." She looked down, her fingers playing with the edge of her blanket. "I just wanted him to be okay. You made sure he got the help he needed," he replied gently. "You've done more for him than many adults would have done." A soft silence filled the room. The CEO stepped back to let her rest. Before he left, she said quietly, "I'm glad I knocked on the gate." "I'm glad you did too." Days passed, and the siblings gradually found comfort in the shelter. They played with other children, attended small classes, and started trusting the staff. The girl still stayed close to her brother, but she began smiling more often. The boy's health improved quickly with proper care and steady meals. The CEO worked behind the scenes with the legal team, social workers, and local authorities to sort out their background and make sure they would never be left alone again. The process was slow, but every step brought them closer to a stable future. On the morning they were scheduled to meet a new guardiana, kind woman who had worked with the shelter for years. The girl stood nervously outside the office. Her brother held her hand tightly. The CEO came over and crouched slightly so he could look them in the eyes. "You're not being taken away," he said with a gentle tone. "You're meeting someone who wants to help you, someone who will make sure you stay together." The girl's grip on her brother's hand loosened a little. "She's kind," he added. "And she already cares about you both." The siblings nodded. The meeting went better than anyone expected. The new guardian spoke softly, asked what games they liked, and listened carefully to everything they said. The girl observed her closely, testing her sincerity in every smile, every answer. And slowly, she began to relax. By the time the meeting ended, the girl felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. That afternoon, the CEO walked them to the exit of the shelter. It wasn't goodbye, but it was the start of a new chapter. The boy looked up at him and whispered, "Thank you." The girl didn't speak at first. She looked at him with eyes full of emotion, gratitude, relief. In something like disbelief that life could change so quickly, finally, she stepped forward and said softly, "You listened when no one else did." He felt those words settle deep inside him. "I won't forget you," she added. He smiled warmly. "You don't have to, and you're always welcome here. This will always be a safe place for you." The girl nodded, holding her brother's hand as they walked toward their new future. The CEO watched them leave, feeling something quiet but powerful, a reminder of why he had chosen this work, and how one conversation at a shelter gate had changed not only their lives but his. Long after they left, he found himself standing at the gate where he first saw her, sitting in the cold. The memory of her small voice, asking for help, even while trying to be brave, came back to him clearly. He closed the gate gently and whispered to himself, "Every child deserves to be heard." And from that day on, he made sure no one who came to the shelter was ever overlooked again.